I always knew working the night shift messed with your head. Spending entire nights stacking boxes in a stuffy warehouse lit by fluorescent lights makes anyone feel strange. But that night, everything felt heavier than usual. I was exhausted, as if every box I lifted carried not just its weight but also my sanity. It was nearly 5 in the morning when I got home, to one of those eerily quiet neighborhoods with identical houses and a flickering streetlight on the corner. My routine was always the same: come in, toss my boots in the corner of the living room, and drag myself to bed. But that night, something made me stop before I even stepped through the door. Right at the entrance, I noticed something odd. There were footprints on the floor, wet marks leading from the front door up to the stairs. I thought they might be mine. Maybe I had stepped in a puddle outside without realizing it. But the more I looked, the more it felt wrong. The prints were large, bigger than the soles of my work boots. Worse, they weren't uniform, as if whoever left them had dragged their feet. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my exhaustion playing tricks on me. After all, I didn't have the energy to worry about dirt at that hour. I just wanted to sleep. I dragged myself upstairs, feeling like each step was a challenge. The hallway light was off, as usual, and the creaking of the wooden stairs echoed louder than normal. I went straight to my room, not even glancing at the rest of the house. I closed the door, collapsed onto the bed, and felt that immediate relief of someone completely drained. All I wanted was to pass out and forget the world existed for a few hours. And it worked, at least for a while. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to a faint sound, almost imperceptible, like shuffling feet coming from the corner of the room. I opened my eyes slowly, still groggy, trying to figure out if it was real or just a strange dream caused by exhaustion. The room was pitch dark, but I felt it. This overwhelming sensation that I wasn't alone. My breathing grew heavier, my heart racing. I took a deep breath and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, maybe a sound from outside. I reached over to turn on the light, feeling a little stupid for getting so spooked. But when the light flicked on, I froze. In the corner of the room near the closet, there was a backpack I had never seen before. For a moment, I just stared at it, trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't mine, that much I knew for sure. And no one else had any reason to leave it there. I'd been living alone for years. My mind started racing, searching for a logical explanation. Could I have brought something home from work and forgotten about it? But it didn't make sense. The backpack looked old, worn out, with frayed straps and dark stains on the fabric, like it had been dragged around for a long time. That unsettling feeling grew stronger. And then the thought I'd been avoiding hit me. What if someone had broken in? My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I stood up slowly, trying not to make a sound. My eyes darted between the backpack and the closet, over and over, like one of them might move at any second. I took a hesitant step toward the backpack, thinking maybe I should open it and see what was inside, but stopped halfway. That's when I heard it. A low creak, almost a whisper, coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. It sounded like a floorboard bending under someone's weight. My stomach dropped. Someone was in the house. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to get out as fast as I could, but another part knew that if I made too much noise, whoever was out there might notice. My hands trembled as I looked around the room, searching for something, anything I could use as a weapon. The only thing I found was a lamp on the nightstand. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I grabbed it and crept toward the door, trying to keep my breathing under control and listening for any movement outside. The silence was so intense, I could almost hear my own heartbeat. I took a deep breath and yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. Only the faint light from the street lamp outside seeped in through the window at the end of the hall. I looked left, then right, my eyes scanning for any shadows, any sign of movement. Nothing. But the silence didn't calm me. It only made everything feel more wrong. I stepped out of the room, gripping the lamp tightly, and started down the stairs. Each step made the wooden floor creak louder, more intrusively. When I reached the bottom, I noticed something I hadn't before. The front door was slightly ajar. Seeing the door open made my heart race even faster. I was absolutely certain I'd locked it when I came home. I always locked it. The chain was still in place, but the lock looked forced, the wood around it slightly splintered. I tried to swallow my panic and force myself to think rationally. Could someone have broken in while I was sleeping and left already, or were they still inside? My forehead was damp with cold sweat as I fumbled for my phone in my pajama pocket. I opened the dialer but hesitated. Should I call the police? What if I'd imagined it all because of how tired I was? But what if I hadn't? I looked around the living room, still clutching the lamp like a useless shield. The dim light from outside barely reached the room, leaving most of it cloaked in shadows. It felt like anything could be hiding there, waiting to reveal itself. I moved toward the door cautiously, straining to hear any sound from outside. The wind rustled the trees, casting dancing shadows on the walls. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I was about to close and lock the door when I heard a noise behind me coming from the kitchen. A metallic clatter like something had fallen. I froze, gripping the lamp tighter. My mind went into overdrive. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were stuck in place. Slowly, I turned toward the kitchen, my pulse thundering in my ears. The hallway leading to it was shrouded in darkness, the faint light from the living room barely cutting through. I forced myself to move, one step at a time, ignoring the creaking floor beneath me. When I reached the kitchen entrance, I stretched out my hand to turn on the light. The bulb flickered a few times before casting a dim, unsteady glow over the room. What I saw made my breath catch. A pot lay on the floor as if it had fallen off the counter, but what really froze me were the footprints. The same ones I'd seen earlier, only now they were smeared with what looked like mud or blood. I tried not to focus on that thought as I traced the trail with my eyes. It led to the pantry door, which was slightly ajar. That tiny, ordinary space suddenly felt like a gateway to something much darker. I knew that if I wanted to end this, I'd have to open that door. With sweaty hands gripping the lamp, I moved closer to the pantry. The door, usually shut tight, was now cracked open just enough to reveal a void of blackness inside. Every step felt heavier, like something was pulling me back. When I finally reached it, I extended my free hand and nudged the door open, bracing myself for whatever might happen. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing shelves lined with cans, bags of rice, and cereal boxes. And in the corner, something that made my blood run cold. A figure was crouched there, small and hunched, as if trying to make itself as compact as possible. I didn't scream. Not because I didn't want to, but because I physically couldn't. The figure turned its head toward me, and that's when I realized something worse. It wasn't exactly human. Its eyes were large and round, reflecting the faint kitchen light like an animal's. Its skin was thin, almost translucent, and its hands, or claws, were long and spindly, with fingers that seemed unnaturally flexible. It didn't move abruptly. It just stared at me as if waiting. The terror consumed me. I dropped the lamp, which hit the floor with a dull thud, and stepped back, never taking my eyes off that thing. When I stepped back, the creature made a low clicking sound. That was enough to send every nerve in my body into overdrive. Before I could think, I turned and bolted for the front door. My only thought was to get out of the house. Everything around me blurred as my adrenaline surged. I reached the door, yanked it open, and ran into the cold night air, feeling it sting my face. I turned back for just a second, expecting to see the creature behind me, but the door was closed. Closed, as if I had never left. I didn't dare go back. I called the police from a payphone a few blocks away, making up a story about seeing signs of a break-in and needing help. When the officers arrived, I watched from a distance as they searched the house. After a while, one of them came out to talk to me. According to them, no one was inside, but the pantry was strange. The walls had scratches on them, like something had been trying to get out. They suggested I change the locks and get some rest. I don't know what I saw that night, but I never slept in that house again. I packed my things and left the next day. To this day, I still think about those eyes watching me and wonder, was that the first time it had been there? It was a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because it was my day off, which was rare with my job. I worked as a manager at a small grocery store, and my routine was hectic, always dealing with deadlines and rushed customers. That day, all I wanted was to relax. The sun was weak, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay home and watch TV. I lived on a quiet street in a neighborhood where pretty much everyone knew each other, so it was rare for anything unusual to happen around there. While sipping my coffee on the porch, I noticed the car, a dark gray sedan with tinted windows, parked right in front of my house. I didn't recognize the car, but I figured it must belong to a neighbor's visitor. Nothing strange about that, but something about it made me uneasy. Maybe it was the fact that the car had been there all morning and no one had gotten in or out. It didn't take long for me to notice the man. He was pacing up and down the sidewalk, his movements mechanical, as if he were waiting for something or someone. He was tall, with thinning hair and a worn-out jacket that seemed far too warm for the weather. I tried to ignore him, but every now and then, I found myself glancing at him through the window. Something about him made me uncomfortable, but I convinced myself it was nothing. After all, my mind was already overloaded with the usual daily stress. I spent the rest of the morning trying to distract myself. I did some chores around the house, washed some clothes, and sorted through boxes in the basement. But every now and then, my curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked out the window. The man was still there. He wasn't doing anything alarming, just walking back and forth, occasionally looking at his phone. But his presence seemed to take up more space than it should. By noon, the car was gone, but the man was still there. I couldn't help but wonder if it was just a coincidence or if he had something to do with the car. I decided to ignore it. After all, it was my day off, and I deserved some peace of mind. When the afternoon came, I started preparing dinner. Something simple, just some pasta with sauce, my go-to recipe when I lacked inspiration. That's when I heard it. 3 firm knocks. Not at the front door, but at the back door. One detail. No one ever used the back door. My heart jumped. I put the spoon down and walked toward the kitchen, trying to come up with any logical explanation. Maybe it was a neighbor needing something or a delivery driver who got the wrong address. But when I looked through the back door window, there he was, the same man. He was standing there, as if patiently waiting. But there was something different. He didn't seem to be waiting. He was staring directly at me. For a moment I froze. He didn't move, just stared, and the polite smile on his face didn't match the situation. I decided not to open the door. Instead, I unlocked the side window and asked, "Can I help you?" He tilted his head slightly, as if assessing the situation, and replied in the calmest voice possible. "Oh, sorry to bother you. I'm a bit lost. I thought I could ask for directions here." Lost? In my backyard? That didn't make any sense. He should have knocked on the front door like any normal person. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. Where are you trying to go?" I asked, trying not to show how uncomfortable I was. He gave a vague smile, as if he had just made up an answer. "Oh, just looking for a friend's house. It should be around here." Something about it didn't feel right. He didn't mention a name or an address, and the way he stood there was odd, like he was deliberately blocking me from seeing anything beyond him. I quickly replied, "I think you might have the wrong street. Good luck." I shut the window before he could say anything else. My heart was pounding. and as I stepped away, I heard him knock again, louder this time. I grabbed my phone and called the police. While waiting for the police, I stayed completely silent in the kitchen, trying to listen for any movement outside. The knocking had stopped, but that didn't make me feel safer. On the contrary, the silence felt even more threatening. I went upstairs to my bedroom to get a better view of the backyard through the window. He wasn't at the door anymore. In fact, he was nowhere to be seen. The yard was empty, lit only by the yellow glow of the porch light. My stomach churned at the thought that he could still be out there, hiding in some corner I couldn't see. When the police arrived, they were polite, but didn't seem to take the situation very seriously. One of the officers gave the yard a quick look and asked if I knew the man. I said no, but as I described what happened, I realized the story sounded almost mundane. A stranger who knocked on the door with a flimsy excuse. They told me to call again if he came back and left shortly after. I felt even more uneasy after they left. I locked every door and window, double-checked each lock, and forced myself to finish making dinner, even though I had no appetite. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise seemed amplified. The wind brushing against the trees in the yard, the creaking of the wooden house. Every sound made me hold my breath for a few seconds, waiting to hear something more. But the night passed without any incidents, and by morning I convinced myself that maybe I had overreacted. Maybe he really was just lost. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But 2 days later, things got even stranger. 2 days later, I found something odd in the yard. It was a discarded cell phone lying near the fence. At first I thought it was just some trash blown in by the wind, but when I picked it up I noticed the phone still had some battery. The screen was cracked, but it turned on. The phone was locked, so I couldn't access much, but there was something on the wallpaper that sent chills down my spine. A photo of my house. It wasn't an old photo from Google or anything like that. It was recent. The porch lights were on, just like they were the night the man came to my back door. My heart raced. Who had taken that photo? And why was the phone in my yard? I spent the whole morning trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe some teenager in the neighborhood was playing a prank. Or maybe it belonged to a delivery driver who lost it while passing by. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. The feeling of being watched came back stronger than ever, as if there were eyes hidden in every corner of my house. That night I started noticing other strange items appearing in my yard. First, it was an old glove made of leather lying near the entrance. Then, a piece of rope I had never seen before. The objects didn't make sense, but the pattern was clear. Someone was leaving them there. I locked the house again and, this time, decided I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I called the police again, but just like before, they dismissed it as nothing. "Probably kids messing around," one of the officers said, trying to reassure me. But there was nothing reassuring about it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I had spent the night listening to every creak and sound in the house, imagining that at any moment someone might try to break in. When I finally went down to the kitchen, I immediately looked out the window toward the backyard. And there it was. Another strange item. This time, it was a small notebook with a torn cover and dirt stains. I took a deep breath, put on my boots, and went outside, even though my heart was pounding. I picked up the notebook carefully, as if I expected it to explode at any moment. When I opened it, I saw that it was full of scribbled notes. But what really made me shiver were the last pages, which were filled with the same address written repeatedly. My address. The handwriting was large, almost childish, as if someone had written it hurriedly. There were drawings too, figures of a house that looked a lot like mine, surrounded by little stick figures that seemed to be people, all looking into the windows. My stomach turned. I shut the notebook immediately and ran inside. I called the police for the third time, now demanding they investigate seriously. This time, they were a little more attentive. They promised to send a patrol to watch the area and took the notebook as evidence. But I knew that wasn't going to make me feel safer. The feeling of being watched was getting stronger. That night, I refused to stay alone. I called a close friend, Mike, to spend the night with me. As I told him the whole story, he looked genuinely concerned but tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just an isolated case of someone obsessed with me. For some reason, his attempt to minimize the situation only made me more frustrated. It wasn't just paranoia. I knew something was wrong. Before going to bed, I checked the locks again and left all the outdoor lights on. But what happened in the hours that followed made me wish I had never returned to that house. A little after midnight, I was awakened by a low sound, almost imperceptible, coming from outside. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy across the yard. Mike was still asleep on the couch in the living room, so I grabbed my phone and forced myself to look out the window. What I saw made me freeze. The man, the same one who had knocked on my door, was standing in the middle of the yard. This time, he didn't look lost or confused. He was holding something large and dark in his arms, but in the dim light, I couldn't tell what it was. The way he moved, calmly and deliberately, sent a deep chill through me. It was as if he knew exactly what he was doing. I tried to wake Mike quietly, but he took too long to process what was happening. By the time he understood, the man was gone. He had disappeared into the darkness. We called the police immediately, and this time they arrived quickly. They searched the entire yard and even the surrounding area, but as always, they found nothing. It was as if the man had never been there. The older officers suggested I might be imagining things, but when I showed them the objects left in the yard and explained everything again, he went quiet. Something finally seemed to catch their attention. After the police left, I tried to go back to bed, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. Mike decided to stay up with me, and we spent the rest of the night talking about what to do next. By morning, we decided I needed to leave the house for a while. I spent a few days at his place, but the feeling of being watched followed me. Then, one of the times I went back to the house to grab some belongings, I found something that sealed my decision never to return. That day, I entered the house during daylight, trying to convince myself there was nothing to fear anymore. I went straight to the bedroom to grab some clothes. When I came back down to the living room, something on the floor caught my eye. It was an envelope. It hadn't been there when I arrived, and from its position, it looked like someone had deliberately placed it in the center of the room. My hands trembled as I picked it up. There was no return address, just my name written in the same childish handwriting I had seen in the notebook found in the yard. Inside the envelope, there was only one photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from outside the house, through the kitchen window at the exact moment I was cooking on the night the man knocked on the back door. The angle was perfect, as if the person had been standing right behind one of the trees in the yard. On the back of the photo, there was only one sentence written: "See you soon." I dropped the photo on the floor and ran out of the house without looking back. After that, I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. I put the house up for sale and moved to an apartment in another state. To this day, I don't know who that man was, what he wanted, or how he knew so much about me. I never saw or heard from him again, but I still feel like, somewhere out there, he's watching. Sometimes, I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I've heard those knocks on the door again. When I rented the basement apartment, I thought I had found a hidden gem. I was in my third year of college, studying architecture, and I needed a cheap, quiet place to focus on my projects. It was one of those old buildings in the city, with creaky wooden stairs and thick walls that seemed to shut out the world outside. The space wasn't big, but it was enough for me. It had a tiny living room-kitchen combo, a bedroom that barely fit my twin bed, and a cramped bathroom. The landlord, Miss Linda, was a sweet older lady who lived upstairs with her grandson. She warned me about the nighttime noises due to the building's age, but I didn't mind. The low rent made up for everything. For the first week, everything seemed normal. The creaking floorboards were frequent, but I got used to them quickly. However, I started noticing sounds that didn't seem to come from upstairs. They were faint noises, like something being dragged across the floor or a door closing softly. At first, I dismissed it. I thought it was just my imagination or maybe a neighbor, since the old building could echo strangely. But as the days went on, I realized some things in my apartment weren't exactly where I remembered leaving them. My pack of cookies on the counter seemed emptier than I recalled, and a notebook I swore I'd left on the table showed up on the floor, leaning against the bed. I started feeling suspicious, but at the same time, I thought I might just be paranoid. Who hasn't forgotten where they left something or eaten a bit more than they realized, right? I tried convincing myself it was nothing, that the stress of classes and my busy schedule were playing tricks on me. But one night, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was a Friday evening and I had just come back from a study marathon at the library. When I opened the fridge, I noticed the yogurt container I was sure I had just bought was completely empty. The container still sitting there as if someone had finished it and put it back. That gave me chills. I lived alone. No one had a key besides Miss Linda, and she would never do something like that. That was when I decided to act. The next day, I went to an electronics store and bought a small camera, the kind you can hide easily. I placed the camera on the shelf in the living room among some books, with the lens pointed toward the main space of the apartment. Just having it there made me feel a little more at ease. If something strange was really happening, I'd have proof. I spent the rest of Saturday trying not to think about it, watching shows and pretending everything was fine. When night came, I left the camera recording and went to bed. I'll admit it took me a long time to fall asleep, but when I finally did, I had no idea that what I'd see the next morning would change everything. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of anxiety in my chest. I made a quick coffee and connected the camera to my laptop to review the footage. The file was long, so I sped it up to the middle of the night when the apartment was completely silent. At first, everything seemed normal, just me shifting in bed and some shadows of trees cast by the windows. But then, something caught my attention. Around 2 a.m., a small door in the corner of the apartment, which I always thought was a locked maintenance closet, began to open slowly. My heart raced. A figure emerged, crawling out in a mechanical way. The person looked thin, wearing dirty, faded clothes, with messy hair covering part of their face. I watched, frozen, as the figure moved with an eerie calm through the room. First, they went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed my loaf of bread. Then, they sat on the floor in the darkest corner and started eating. My stomach churned as I realized this wasn't a casual break-in. This person was at ease, like they already knew every detail of the place. After a few minutes, they got up, put everything back as it was, and disappeared back into the small door, closing it behind them. I paused the video, unable to believe what I had just seen. How long had this person been there? How had I not noticed anything? My first reaction was pure panic. I backed away from the table as if the person could come out of the screen at any moment. Every sound in the apartment, even the creak of the floorboards, seemed louder. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Confront Miss Linda? But what if it was dangerous? I tried to think rationally. I grabbed my phone and watched the video again, pausing at the details. The figure looked too thin, almost sickly. Something was deeply wrong. The small door, which I assumed led to a useless space, was now a mystery I felt compelled to solve. But at the same time, the fear of opening it and finding whoever or whatever was inside held me back. That night, I couldn't bring myself to open the door. I locked my bedroom, wedged a chair under the doorknob, and tried to sleep, though sleep felt impossible. Every little noise seemed magnified, like the person could emerge again at any moment. When daylight finally came, I gathered my courage and decided to talk to Miss Linda. I climbed the stairs with my heart racing and knocked on her door. She greeted me with a smile, holding a cup of tea. "Miss Linda, can I ask you something? That little door in my apartment, where does it lead?" I tried to sound casual. Her smile faded for a moment. She looked at me, and for a second I thought she was going to say something important. But all she said was, "Oh, that space is just an old storage area. It should be locked. There's nothing in there." I knew she was lying. Something about the way she avoided my eyes and gripped her cup put me on edge. But what could I do? I decided not to push it, and went back to the apartment. Before I went downstairs, though, I noticed something strange. The door leading to the basement had a new lock on it that I hadn't seen before. It was shiny, as if it had been installed recently. That only deepened my unease. That new lock stayed on my mind. It seemed so out of place in that old building. I decided I needed to act, but without alerting Miss Linda. That same night, I waited until the building was completely silent. I grabbed a screwdriver and a kitchen knife, the best ideas my anxious mind could come up with, and went to the small door. My breathing was heavy, and my hands were shaking as I turned the handle. To my surprise, it turned easily. The interior was dark and had a strong smell, a mix of mold and something metallic that made me gag. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I lit up the space. It was smaller than I imagined, barely big enough for a person to stand. But in the farthest corner, there was a thin mattress, some clothes piled up, and food wrappers stuffed into plastic bags. My stomach churned. Someone had been living there. But what really made me step back was a small but deeply unsettling detail. On top of the mattress was an open notebook. As I moved closer, I saw it was filled with scattered notes, but my name appeared multiple times, along with disturbingly precise details of my routine. Leaves for college at 7:30. Comes back at 6 Gao. Bought bread yesterday. My body froze. This person wasn't just living there. They had been watching me every single day. I ran out of there after seeing that notebook. I rushed upstairs, locking every door behind me. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what I had just discovered. How could someone be living so close to me, watching my every move, without me noticing? Even worse, what did this person want? I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, asking if I could crash at their place for the night. I made up some excuse about a leak because I knew if I told the truth, they wouldn't believe me. The next day, I decided to take definitive action. Early in the morning, I returned to the apartment with a heavy heart and went straight to the notebook. This time, I brought my phone and took pictures of the notes as evidence. Then, I went back upstairs to confront Miss Linda. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me so early. "Miss Linda, something serious is happening. Someone is living in the basement, behind that little door. I found things, and there's a notebook with information about me." Her expression changed completely. She turned pale, and for a moment it looked like she didn't know what to say. Then she shook her head, as if trying to deny it. "You must be mistaken, dear. No one could live there." But I knew she was hiding something. I pressed her, showing her the photos I had taken of the notebook. Miss Linda stared at them for a few seconds, her face a mix of fear and guilt. "Fine, I'll tell you the truth, but you have to promise not to call the police," she said, catching me off guard. Before I could respond, she started talking quickly, as if she needed to get it off her chest. "After my husband died 5 years ago, I started renting out the basement for extra money. A man showed up looking desperate and said he just needed a place to stay for a while. He paid me in cash, always up front, and I let him stay." I could barely believe what I was hearing. "And he's still there? Do you know that?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. She nodded, shrinking into herself like a child caught doing something wrong. "I thought he'd left. He disappeared for months, but I never had the courage to go in and check. I thought maybe she hesitated, wasn't alive anymore. My mind was spinning. So this man had been there the entire time, living in the shadows while I went about my life. I couldn't listen to any more. I just thanked her, left, and went straight to the police station. At the station, I explained everything to the officers, showing them the photos of the notebook and describing what I had found in the apartment. They listened carefully but didn't hide their skepticism. After all, stories like this weren't exactly common. Still, they promised to send a team to investigate the basement. Later that afternoon, they came back to the building with me, and I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Miss Linda was waiting at the door, visibly nervous. The officers asked her to open the small door, but this time she hesitated. "I've already told you everything I know," she mumbled, clutching the keys tightly. One of the officers had to insist before she finally unlocked it. The smell was even stronger than the night before, like something rotting inside. The officers went in with flashlights, examining every corner. One of them moved the mattress aside and found a small opening in the floor, like a hidden passage leading to a narrow tunnel. My heart pounded. "Where does this lead?" I asked, but no one had an answer. One officer climbed down to investigate while the others stayed alert. After a few minutes, he came back, his face serious. "It looks like the tunnel connects to the city's sewer system. He was probably using it to come and go without being noticed." The thought of that man having such an easy escape route so close to me was terrifying. After hours of searching, it was clear that the man was no longer there. The police found more evidence in the tunnel: food wrappers, a rusty knife, and some clothes that looked like they had been left in a hurry. This only reinforced the idea that he had fled as soon as he realized I was onto him. Although they didn't find him, the police registered the case as a break-in and strongly advised me to leave the apartment immediately. I didn't need to hear it twice. That same night, I packed my things and stayed at a friend's place. In the following days, Miss Linda sealed off the basement and put the apartment up for sale. I never went back. The experience left me paranoid for a long time. Every strange noise made me jump, and I spent months looking over my shoulder, feeling like he could reappear at any moment. Even now, years later, I can't sleep in places with locked doors or hidden spaces. I always wonder, who was that man? Why was he living there? And the most disturbing thought, what would he have done if I had never discovered him? These are questions I'll probably never have answers to. But one thing is certain, I'll never ignore a strange noise in the middle of the night again. I've always been the quiet neighbor, the kind who says a quick hello in the elevator and keeps to themselves. My apartment building is old, one of those maze-like ones with narrow hallways and doors that creak ominously. It was last October, early fall, when I first noticed a new tenant moving into the unit next to mine. He looked to be in his mid-30s, always wearing a worn leather jacket and carrying overstuffed grocery bags. One afternoon, as I was coming home from work, I saw him struggling with his bags and keys. Out of reflect, I offered to help, but he hesitated for a second, like he was about to refuse. Forced a smile and accepted. I found it odd, but didn't think much of it. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was heavy, damp, like the place hadn't been aired out in weeks. At first glance, the apartment seemed normal. Slightly messy, with boxes scattered around, but nothing alarming. While I placed the grocery bags on the kitchen counter, I heard a muffled sound coming from one of the closed doors. It sounded like crying. My heart started racing. I casually asked if he had a dog or something. He let out a nervous laugh and said it was just the TV playing in the other room. Before I could ask anything else, he quickly thanked me for my help and practically shoved me out the door. Something felt off, but I convinced myself I was overthinking it. That night, as I tried to watch a movie, Strange noises came through the walls. At first I thought it was a neighbor playing loud music or something, but the sounds became clearer. There were banging noises, followed by muffled screams. It sounded like someone calling for help, but the voice was so distorted through the walls I couldn't make out the words. My chest tightened with unease. I tried to ignore it, thinking it might be a couple arguing or maybe the guy next door watching an action movie at full volume. But the noises continued, desperate and relentless, and I couldn't sit still anymore. I mustered up some courage and went to his door. The hallway was dark, with one flickering light at the far end, like something out of a horror movie. I knocked hard, but there was no answer. I waited a few seconds and knocked again. Nothing but silence. I went back to my apartment, feeling a knot in my stomach. The sounds had stopped abruptly, almost as if someone had turned everything off the moment I stepped out. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, but I barely slept that night. Every little noise in the building seemed amplified, and my heart jumped at every creak. The next morning, I woke up determined to get to the bottom of this. I waited until I heard movement in the hallway before stepping out to confront him. When I finally saw him, he was locking his door, looking completely unbothered, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. I hesitated but decided to ask directly about the noises. "I heard some strange sounds last night. Everything okay over here?" I tried to keep my tone light. He gave a short, dry laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, that? Probably just the building. These old pipes make noise all the time," he said, not even looking me in the eye. Before I could press him further, he muttered a quick, "Have a good day," and disappeared down the hall. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the pipes excuse didn't add up. The noises I'd heard weren't just random clanging or creaking. They were screams. The rest of the day passed in a blur of unease. When I came home that evening, the hallway was eerily silent. Something felt different, and it wasn't just my paranoia. I did something I'd never done before. I peeked through the peephole in my door. I waited for a few minutes, watching for any movement outside his apartment. Nothing. No sounds, no shadows. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to ignore it. That night, the noises came back. But this time, they were even louder. It sounded like someone pounding on the walls, screaming with a hoarse, desperate voice. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call the police. But what if I was just imagining things? After a few minutes of debating with myself, I decided to see for myself. I grabbed my flashlight, the hallway was always poorly lit, and went to his door again. I knocked hard, but just like the night before, there was no answer. The noises stopped the moment I touched the wood. It was as if whoever, or whatever, knew I was there. The silence afterward was worse. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to catch anything, but all I felt was the oppressive stillness. I decided to walk around the building to see if I could find another neighbor to confirm what I was hearing. Most of the doors seemed untouched, dust gathering on the handles, as if no one had lived there for a while. My building had always been somewhat empty, but that night it felt abandoned. When I returned to my floor, his door was ajar. I couldn't hear footsteps or any signs of movement, just that heavy silence, beckoning me to look inside. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open slowly, trying not to make a sound, and the flashlight shook in my hand. The smell was even stronger now, a mix of mildew and something metallic, almost like rust. The apartment was completely dark, with the boxes I'd seen before scattered differently, as if someone had rummaged through them in a hurry. I moved forward cautiously, the floor creaking under my feet. I called out to him, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. When I passed the kitchen, I noticed the door where I'd heard the muffled crying the day before was wide open. A chill ran down my spine. Inside the room there was nothing. No furniture, no TV, no sign that anyone had lived there. It looked like the place had been abandoned for weeks. But what really froze me was the stain on the floor, right in the center of the room. It was dark, uneven, and looked like someone had tried to scrub it away but couldn't entirely remove it. I knelt to get a closer look and realized the metallic smell was coming from it. Blood? My heart nearly stopped, and I stood up so fast I stumbled. That's when I heard it. A door slamming somewhere in the apartment. I spun around, heart pounding, and aimed the flashlight at the hallway leading back to the living room. It was pitch black, darker than it should have been with a window nearby. I called out again, this time louder, but my voice cracked. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of my breathing. Taking a few hesitant steps toward the front door, I felt a chill run down my neck, as if someone was standing right behind me. The flashlight started flickering, the beam of light sputtering uncontrollably. "Not now," I muttered, trying to steady it. That's when I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable, coming from the empty room behind me. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was clear, urgent, almost pleading. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Summoning every ounce of strength, I managed to stumble toward the front door. The flashlight finally gave out, plunging the apartment into complete darkness. And then I heard it. A deep, heavy breathing right next to me. It wasn't mine. I didn't think twice. I turned and bolted for the door, but I tripped over something. A box on the floor. The fall sent me crashing into the wall, my forehead colliding hard. The pain was instant, but I couldn't stop to process it. Frantically, I felt around the floor for something to help me get up. That's when I felt it. Something cold touching my shoulder. It couldn't be real. I forced myself to look, even though I knew I wouldn't like what I saw. But there was nothing there. Just the suffocating emptiness and the unshakable feeling that something, or someone, was too close. I managed to scramble to my feet, legs shaking, and practically threw myself out of the apartment. The hallway was eerily quiet, my ragged breaths echoing against the walls. When I turned to look back, the neighbor's door was shut, as if it had never been open. My instinct was to call the police, but by the time I reached the lobby, the fear of sounding crazy stopped me. Who would believe me? Even so, I promised myself I'd never set foot in that apartment again. The next morning, I decided I had to confirm what was going on, no matter how unsettling it was. I went to the building's maintenance guy, a man named Jack who had been around for years and knew everything about the tenants. When I asked him about the neighbor in 304, he furrowed his brow. "Apartment 304? That place has been empty for 2 months. The last tenant left in the middle of the night, didn't even turn in the keys properly," he said casually, as if it meant nothing. My stomach dropped. "No, that's not possible. I helped the guy with his groceries 2 days ago," I insisted. Jack shook his head, looking uneasy. "It's been empty. No one's rented it since." I went back to my apartment, my mind racing. What had I heard? More importantly, who was the man I'd helped that day? I decided to take one last look through the peephole, just to be sure. The hallway was empty, silent as usual. But the door to 304 was wide open again. I couldn't bring myself to go near it. That same week, I asked to transfer to another unit in the building. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what was real or what my mind might have invented. But every time I pass by the old apartment, I catch a faint whiff of that metallic smell. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I still hear the screams,